What's up, everyone? Punching, wacky rigging. Mr. Kyle Weisenburger is going to share all the secrets today, right now. I'm excited. Let's go. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Lines In Podcast. And tonight's show, we're calling it like a holiday special. I'm here with a good friend. We fished for years together. He fishes the FLW Tour. He's a Fisherman Central Invitational Pro, Mr. Kyle Weisenburger. Kyle, what's up, bub?
Not much, just out in the garage trying to get around the snow here. It's snowing outside, but only have a couple weeks till the season starts, so got to start working out here.
Yeah, and when I called Kyle, see if he wanted to do a show and what he had in mind, I said, pick one technique. He couldn't pick one, so tonight we are bringing you two techniques. So it's going to be kind of a long show, but one of the techniques we're going to talk about is just heavy cover punching. Now we're going to be talking like 3/4 ounce weights and above, and then we're also going on the opposite end of the spectrum, and we're going to talk about wacky worm fishing, weightless finesse fishing with spinning rods. So right off the bat, there's a huge difference between, there's multiple ways to punch, right? So we got just your standard, this is a punch skirt. This does not have a hook. This is something the line runs through, and then you put your own hook in, which is like a heavy EWG, a super line hook here, and that comes through. You use a straight shank, or what you have is an LBA Baits ditch pickle right here with one of these right here, a big old 1.5 ounce weight like this. Now, traditional punching is done like this, and Kyle's going to share a lot of secrets. So let's just keep it with the punch. So, Kyle, what's up? What do you like to punch with, buddy?
Well, I probably go against the grain from what a lot of people like to do when I punch, but I've learned from some of my mistakes. Like at first when I started punching, I lost a lot of fish. You know, you'd hook up with them, but then you just wouldn't get them in the boat. You know, they'd come up out of the thick cover, but then they jump, the hook would come out. You got a lot of weight when you're punching. So like that fish has a lot of leverage when it actually gets out of the cover and it has a chance to jump.
Yeah, so, I'm listening. I'm just doing some light.
They seem a little different, but it seems like it works for me. As I prefer not to throw braid when I punch. I throw a really heavy fluorocarbon. I throw like 25-pound gamma fluorocarbon, and I have a super.
Hold that up again. Let me see that. Hold that up again. Yeah. What is that? 25?
25.
Cool. Okay, cool. Gamma edge. All right.
So with that, we're throwing big weight. So I got 25-pound fluorocarbon, and I've got a 7'11". This is a iRod Bubs punch rod. This is the best rod I've ever found for punching. It's super sensitive. It's got a lot of backbone through, most of the rod, but it has a really small section at the end of the rod that is soft, and you can really like flip your baits in well. You can shake your baits, and it just seems like it gives the fish just a little bit of sponginess that you're not just ripping, a big hole when you set the hook. So this is just like a traditional, like 1 ounce on here. And this is an LBA Baits, like creature bait. And I like a bait that doesn't have a lot of appendages going lateral. It's okay to have appendages, but I like them to where when they go through the mat, they're basically folding up and sliding right through. So you're not getting a restriction. You're not getting the appendages tore off. They just slide through the mats a lot better. The other reason I like the fluorocarbon also is because I feel like the fluorocarbon is more slippery. So when you find a little hole or you find a patch that you're flipping it in there, that fluorocarbon slides through it a lot faster than braid. With all the braids that are together, that line seems to like catch a little more, and it's louder. So that's what I like to do as far as that. The other difference, when you think of all this heavy equipment, heavy line, heavy weights, I actually try to use the smallest possible hook that I can find, for the simple fact of well, this is a TK133. This is a trocar.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't have a lot of gap this way, but it's a heavy gauge hook. So when I set the hook on those fish and the hook gets in their face, there's not a lot of extra hook hanging out the side that it can snag on when you're bringing it through. You want that hook as close to its cheek as possible, so it's basically weedless when you're almost pulling the fish out. If you're around a lot of viney stuff, pads, stuff like that, we've all set the hook, the fish takes off running, and then all of a sudden he's hung. I think a lot of that's because the gap of the hook sometimes is a little bit too big. So that's something. You want a stout hook, but I go with the smallest possible hook that I can get away with. Sometimes
do you think that's because of is that because of the fluorocarbon? You like that setup fluorocarbon with that hook, and you're saying 25-pound gamma to that hook on a 711 eye rod, right?
Right.
And the reel is okay. So that setup right there is the ultimate punching setup from what size weight to what size weight. So
if I can get in like water hyacinth, or I can find big, just topped out hydro mats, whatever, and I can get a 3/4 through, I'd love to flip a 3/4 if I'm good enough to like flip it right in those little crevices and holes, where there's seams. Most of the time, though, I would say the all-around best is probably a 1 ounce to 1 1/4 with that setup. Just because you're not wasting good-looking flips. You think you can get it in there, and it's just not enough weight sometimes to slide it in there. And a lot of these are reaction bites, so as soon as it's going through, like, you don't want it to like barely go through and then let it like manipulate it down. Like, you actually want it going like free falling through there, and that's how you're getting a lot of those reaction bites. A lot of times the mat will actually bubble as soon as the bait's going through. Like, those fish have it instantly. Like, they can somehow sense it coming through the mat and they can get it. Now, the one difference I would do is I also have another setup with gamma braid that is the exact same reel. It's the exact same rod, but I'll go to a 50 or 65-pound braid when I get an ounce, like say 1.5 ounces or up to 2 ounces. I feel like when you get to the fluorocarbon at that really heavy, at the heavy end of the spectrum with the weights, it's just a little bit harder to work with, and I feel like the braid does a little bit better. But both techniques, the other thing that I prefer is when you think of getting them out of all that cover, I honestly try not to horse the fish out of there. The way the rod is set up, it has a lot of loading action. So as long as you're putting, you set the hook and you put the pressure on it, and the fish is, it's sloshing its head. The goal is to get it back through basically the hole that you punched through. So if you work that fish up to the top of the surface and you just continue to, you got to give him pressure, but the last thing I think you want to do is really rip on that fish, because the more that you're pulling, the more chance you're making a little bigger hole where the hook penetrated through, and the barb's not going to be as effective. So there's times when you have to absolutely, if they're going to stuff, you got to get them out. But the way that I like to do it is just enough to get them, up, and I'm controlling them. There's no slack. It's just constant pressure, and I'm pulling them until, they get through the mat, and then it's either 2 quick reels and it's a boat flip in, or if they, surge or something, then you can net them or whatever. But it's nice. Just a technique I love to do.
Yeah, no. Now, is it always a straight shank hook, or is there an offset play in there too?
The more that I've done and worked with the snow knot, I'm just a straight shank guy when it comes to, short cat. It's right in front of you, and the snow knot, when you set the hook, and you'll probably show it here when you're going to show how to tie the knot. That hook actually, when you put pressure, the hook actually will rise up when there's pressure put on. So the hook, goes from being like this, and when you put pressure on a snow knot, the hook will actually turn, and it'll get them right, right where it should. So I prefer just a straight shank, heavy gauge hook. The ones I'm prefer throwing, they're hard to find. It's a TK133. It's a trocar. That's the best hook that I've found in like a 3/0. I'll go to a 4/0 if I'm throwing a bait with a little more bulkiness, or I feel like I need it. But the 3/0, honestly, for me, I've caught a lot of solid size fish just doing it that way. And the hookup ratio seems pretty good.
So you feel good going to war with, punching mats, 7, 8, 9 pounders with that setup right there in the boat.
Yeah. If I get to that caliber fish, I'd probably prefer to go to a 4/0 hook.
Okay.
Maybe
style. That same style.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. But like where I fish, Ohio, wherever, a 2 or 3 pound fish, a 4 pound kicker is kind of like the norm. That's my setup, because I'm also not throwing giant baits for them. A lot of these baits that I'm throwing, like this is the LBA baits, that I was showing you. A Berkeley pit boss, just a 4-inch pit boss is another one of my favorites. There's not a ton of plastic on them. They're pretty soft. So that 3/0 hook fits in them pretty good. But like I said, I'll go to a 4/0 from time to time. I'm always playing around looking for something different if I need to, but if it's working, I'm sticking with it.
Now, are you a bobber stopper guy? Are you a T-stop guy? Are you a 1 or 2 bobber stoppers? Is it different for fluoro to braid? What do you got, bud?
I'm just basically a bobber stopper kind of guy. Like, just these bigger, rubber ones that you can slide on. I mean, there's all different sizes you can get. These are just like I got a mega pack from ARC. It's just a large bobber stopper. They're tough. One thing with the fluorocarbon is I will retie probably, every 3 or 4 fish, probably, just because it's fluorocarbon and, maybe not braid. You're bringing them out a lot of garbage. Some of the grass, if you're around, like, you can flip this stuff around like sawgrass and like big reeds too. Some of that stuff's actually pretty sharp from time to time if your line hits it right. I'll just throw a new bobber stopper on. I know some guys run like double bobber stoppers, so they don't have to change it as often. But I'm just kind of like if it's getting worn out, I'll just sit down and I'll just retie one, or I'll have 2 rods just ready to rock and go to the other one.
Yeah. If it crosses your mind, sit down and retie.
Right.
And I think for punching, I would say me and you agree on the majority of it. Straight shank hooks. I use a little bit bigger hooks. I got the ditch pickle right here. And then I have a hammer crawl right here. Let me see where my hammer crawls are. And I got a hammer crawl right here. And you can see these are a bigger profile bait. But with this bait right here, this ditch pickle, I like to use a 4/0. It fits it really good. It's a 4/0 straight shank. Well, that's a 5. I've been using VMCs and I've been using Gamakatsus. There's a couple different things. Sorry about that, folks. But you can see right here, this is a 3/0 VMC straight shank hook. And then this is a Gamakatsu. Now, this is what I used in Florida. This is a 5/0. It is just a strong, super stout hook. But what you got to do is I want to show you a simple Texas rig on how we're rigging these, and then I want to show you how to tie the Palomar. So what you have is your hook right here, and you can see what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread it. Let me get it clear here. Right there. Thread it about a quarter way on, poke it through. And this is a big hook. But what happens is you pull it all the way through. You get it there. This hook takes up this whole bait and it gets it into meat. And I really like that. So a lot of times when you're punching these fish, sometimes the bite happens on the fall. Sometimes it happens on the bottom as you shake it and twitch it. It happens so many different ways you don't know. You have to let the fish tell you. Like when Kyle was mentioning the 3/4, an ounce, 1.5 ounces, all those different weights. Sometimes that will determine, the bite determines the weight, and sometimes the hook size and all that. But I like a big hook. I like big braid. I mean, I like 50-pound braid. I don't punch with fluorocarbon, and I have lost some fish. So I actually, at Wright Patman in 2021, I lost a bunch of fish first day, and it was all making an adjustment to fluorocarbon, and it did make a big difference because I was ripping a hook in the mouth. And another tip I want to give you guys is when you set the hook on a straight shank hook, do not drop slack to the fish and set the hook. It's like a drop shot. Get nice tight pressure and like lean into them, just like there's the bite, and lean. Don't drop slack to them and slack line them. A lot of times you'll rip a great big hook in their, or a great big hole in their mouth. So those tips right there, bobber stoppers, I use 2. I do not put my bobber stoppers super tight to the weight. I like to have a little room. Sometimes I just feel that sometimes that big weight, that Fisherman Central tungsten right here, just kind of opens that fish's mouth, because the way you snail knot your hook and you set the hook, it is just all about leverage, and then that big weight right there just kind of opens their mouth. So I always like to have a little slack. I've seen a lot of guys, some guys don't even use a weight for punching, or a bobber stopper. So yeah, that's pretty much it on punching. I want to show you guys one thing on how to tie that snail knot, and I have some string line right here. I got a mess because I'm doing tackle, but I want to show you guys. This is just a spinnerbait trailer, just because it's got a big eye on it, and I can show you guys what we got going on. But what you want to do is actually take that hook point and face the hook point towards you, like you're actually going to put it on backwards. And you take your one end of your line and you push it through the side where the hook eye is, or the hook point is. You want it to go through that side. Once you get it through, you pull just a little bit of slack, and I pinch it right here, right where the hook bends. Right here, you see the hook bend. I pinch it right there. Once I do that, I take it, and got to have a little more slack, but then I just take it and I wrap it. And I wrap it around the line I fed through and the hook point itself, and I come through. And then once you get it wrapped up, it's going to look like this. You do not want this to float over top, back over top. And then you take this tag end right here, the end you were wrapping, and push it right back through. Now this line's a little tough to work with, but I kind of want to show you what it looks like. And then once you pull it, do not let that go over the top of this eye right here. And then you kind of pull it tight, and then you snug this one tight. And then you can see on these hooks you have right here, you can see it right there. You can see there's a little keeper. So you got to get your line over that keeper. This doesn't have the keeper. And then you just pull it straight down, pull this one right here, keep pulling, keep pulling. Now, this hook is super important, because remember, you don't know where the bite's coming. Sometimes you'll flip it in there, and like Kyle said, they'll hump the pads, and then you'll set the hook. Sometimes you flip it in there and you have to shake it. Sometimes it's on the halfway pull. But whenever there's pressure on this line, that hook point always rolls out. Always. It's always going to kick out. Boom, 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 boom. Kyle's got one rigged up. Kyle, show him how that knot works on that snail knot works on that rod. You got it rigged up. Slide that weight up and down.
Yeah.
Super cool.
So on this one, this is my braided line, but so when you have it straight here, all right, when I would go to push, I'm going to push the weight of this down. See how that hook, I'm putting pressure down, that hook pops right out. And then if I would take that pressure off, it's loose again. But when I push down, like I'm setting the hook, that hook, you know, see how it's pulling right straight up. The hook point is in the perfect position where you want it. You don't want that pointing down. It's pointing up exactly where you want it.
There you go, guys. I think that punching wise, I mean, I use a 7/8 rod, and I was using it for punching, but once you get around those bigger caliper fish, I actually called Kyle when I left, because he's been fishing in Florida for a while, and I said, man, I lost 2 fish, you know, one I had my hands on, the other, but that's 14 pounds in a tournament. 14 pounds I lost, and I felt like I didn't have enough leverage, and I was underpowered, and I had a 7/8 heavy, and I needed to have that 7-11, and I think, and I made a few mistakes, and we still learn as anglers, so I'm still learning. You know, it was interesting when you shared that 3/0 hook, you know, and ripping them through the grass. You know, that's small things that the average guy does not think about. So, man, is there anything else out there before we move on to wacky rigs? I mean, we covered the reels, high-speed reel. 7-1, 8s to 1s, braided line or fluorocarbon, nothing smaller than 20-25 pound fluorocarbon, braided line. I mean, you could probably do it with I like 50 to 65. I mean, what do you prefer on braid? 50 to 65, I would say, right? Is a good size.
I mean, I prefer to go 50 just because I feel the line is more manageable. It's just, I don't know. There's less going on with it. It fits your spool. It's easier to cast, but there's times when, I mean, you almost need 65. I mean, when you get a really heavy mat that blows up against a a whole bunch of, it gets real packed, or
Mm-hmm.
you're around big viney pads, or you just
Gator
don't
grass.
know. I mean, there's a time and a place.
Yeah.
Normally when I use the 65-pound braid, it's when I have to get the fish out of the thickest cover and get them out fast. If I have just grass or whatever, even though it's thick, if I can take a little more time, I'll go to the, the fluorocarbon or like the 50-pound braid. But when you got to hook them and get them immediately out, that's where I like to go to more of the 65-pound braid.
Yeah, and we're not saying line shyness neither to move to like fluorocarbon. I don't think the fish are line shy at all in those mats at all. Do you? I mean, from fishing Indian and places like that, braided line catches them just as good as fluorocarbon, but there's a reason to use a braid and there's a reason to use the fluorocarbon.
Yeah. I think that honestly that most of the bites happen on the initial fall, so it really probably doesn't matter. You could throw a 100-pound braid and you're still getting a lot of those bites. But I will say, I've had some times where I fished clear water on cold fronts, and that bait, you flip it in there, and that fish is, in my mind, I'm picturing it's a couple feet away, and you're yo-yoing that up to the top of the mat, shaking it, dropping it back down. I truly feel like the fluorocarbon in my mind, like it generates more bites in that situation when it's a 5 or 8 seconds after the initial flip and you're still working that bait. To me, that fish is coming over there out of curiosity, and anything that you can do, especially if it's if it's the fluorocarbon that just masks it just enough to get that bite, I feel like it generates a few more bites.
Yeah, and there's something you mentioned right there. There's small things you can do, guys, to, like, say you're fishing a heavy pressure situation, or the fish are there and they're not biting. You can chartreuse dip, play with the colors of your baits. That is a huge thing. It's putting rattles in them. And I think something like that don't get talked about enough, but me and you fished the same event at Mosquito Lake, remember? All the local boys were up on the north end. A lot of the guys we fished with, heavy hitters locally, Gary Ganner, Mikey Man, these dudes. I go up there. They were up there, and I got a bad boat number. They were doing the exact same thing. The only thing different was the yo-yo and having that rattle in it. Those baits could locate that. Those fish could locate those fish better, or the bait better. I truly believe that. It was just something a little bit different. And that's huge flipping. I mean, a lot of guys do it. So I think it's making a comeback and punching and all that. But I think punching's never went away. That is a specific technique we just talked about that will always be here. It's nothing to do with bank beating. You can go out offshore and punch. There's punching offshore. So, yeah. Where's a unique situation you punched in that you didn't have no plans of?
There was one year at Lake Seminole, we were fishing an FLW tour event, and I kind of through all of practice, I never really, the mats honestly were in no foot of water. And I'm I was getting some bites out actually in the deeper hydrilla and whatever. And during the tournament, I actually was I'm going to go up there and I'm going to check some of these mats. And I remember pulling up to this one right at the end of practice. And I was like, I'm going to punch a little bit, even though there's literally 6 inches of water underneath it or whatever. And I think the water was actually dropping during the tournament. So I thought it was, even if they were up there, we're probably going to be going. And I hook one and I swim it off, and it felt like a good one. And I swear I went back the first day of the tournament, and there was an alligator sitting up on top of this mat, and he goes off of it. I was like, I'll still flip, flip. It was like a mud mat, but there was these holes in it. And I go up to where I had that bite, and I flip through it, and I caught a 6.5 pounder on the first flip. And I go over to the left side of the mat, and I flip over to that one, and I catch one just under 6. And I'm thinking, where can I find more of these things, these mats? And I ended up doing good the first day, but then I think that water kind of kept dropping the day 2 of the event. And I only caught 2 punch in the second day. But it was one of those things that, in my mind, a bass, if it has enough of a canopy or it can get underneath there and it feels comfortable underneath there, sometimes it's honestly, there's nothing that's too shallow. I've caught them where you'll punch your weight through and you're I'm on the bottom already, and you'll catch some. I mean, preferably I like about 1 foot to 2 foot underneath the mats. That's where I feel like the best
boats in 4.
They have enough. Yeah, or less. I mean, if you're just, a lot of times those mats will get, just the wind will blow them up there, and they get blown up against cover they probably already were next to. And then it's just taking that heavy weight, and just busting through there. And it's it's just one of them things. You just know it's going to happen. You just don't know which flip it's going to happen. And it's just a fun technique I like doing.
Yeah,
it's a big fish technique too.
It is. Now, to find a productive mat, I keep saying we're going to move on, but to find a productive mat, going through with the 1 ounce, 2 ounce weights and doing your thing, trying to get to a new body of water and just getting there. I mean, that's a lot of work to get, to find fish. Do you like to do another technique? Maybe frog fishing a little bit, maybe on top of those mats to find an isolated group of fish or an area where there's some fish? Do you do any of that or?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, maybe I'm out in front of them, catching them on a rattle trap, chatterbait, even a buzz bait, something that's telling me there's some fish there. But probably one of the biggest things that I look for in the mats that has helped me is if you're in just what I'm gonna say, those cheese mats where you look for blowholes, you look for places where bass have busted through that mat and it's leaving, like you can tell there's like little holes and you're like, I know one blew up there at some point. The other thing is listening with your ears for bait fish, bluegill popping, things like that. Like if I hear that, I'm 100% stopping. I'm going to throw, depends what the conditions are, but I'll frog it, I'll punch it, I'll wacky worm the outside of it. I'm spending time around there because I know that with that many bluegills around there, there's bass around.
And always pay attention to the current, the forage. I mean, those are always keys too in there. But you mentioned one thing, and we might as well get started on it. I've been fishing with him for a while now. When me and Kyle first started fishing, he got my boat, and I actually just put it away. I have to share it with you guys. Hang on. When Kyle first got my boat, this is what he got my boat with. You know what that is, friend?
The old Lolo.
I've got my butt spanked by this thing, and real quick, I had a spinning rod out and learned how to throw these little things. They catch fish, but Kyle's always been kind of a finesse fisherman, and when we fished team tournaments, I did a lot of the power fishing, and Kyle was more like power finesse. It was his own style, and he still fishes that way, but along the years of him fishing and traveling, he's been fishing the wacky rig. Now, that was something we didn't fish together much back then. That is something that you kind of just started doing. Man, I throw it, but I don't throw it enough, I'm sure. Dude, what is the deal with that dang wacky rig? You've got so much confidence on that thing. What is up?
Yeah, it's one of these techniques that when you get the feel for it and you know you have it right, like it's my number one confidence bait. Like I can feel like I can generate a bite on that when I can't get a bite on anything else. And it wasn't me coming across it. Like I traveled with David Dudley for a few years, and he obviously is probably the best in the world. So I learned a lot from him. And it was one of those things that took me a while. Like it's not like just, hey, throw a wacky worm and you start getting bit. Like there's an art to it. There's a lot of different things that factor into getting bit on that bait. But when you play with it and you get confidence in it, to date right now, like if I had to go to a tournament and I have to get bit, like I'm throwing the wacky worm.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And before we get further into it, because I'm going to get all your juice, let's start off with what a wacky worm is and what the Cinco is. There's only one brand. You said it yourself, right? There's multiple brands, but you like the Yamamoto brand. It's been around for a long time. It's a very productive bait. And also there's a few other ones. This is Big Bite. Kyle, you said you like Bass Pro Shop Sticko. You said they made a good one. But this is what it is, guys. It's super simple. Now, this technique will absolutely catch fish anywhere you fish in the country, and it doesn't matter. If it's a farm pond, a stone quarry, a mud puddle. If there's a fish in it, the wacky worm's going to catch it, I'm pretty sure. But this is what you got. This is just a regular 5-inch Yamamoto Cinco, and this is just a real natural pumpkin color. But they come in different sizes. You can see them here. This is like a 6-inch. This is a Big Bite baits. This is their trick stick. And then these are fished a little bit different. You can Texas rig them. You can do so many things with this. And Kyle's going to share a bunch of his tricks because I don't know much. I just know what you should be using, where you should be throwing it. But I just have problems committing to the finesse side of fishing, which I'm getting better at with Kyle's help. But use real small hooks. I mean, this is where it's going to differ. When you research wacky worm fishing or how to fish this, what hook you need, this, and this, you're going to see a bunch of different answers because there is no wrong way. The hook size depends on, it'll maintain like the rate of the fall. The hook size will change the rate of the fall, but it's pretty much just this right here in a hook. And this is the wacky worm. And you just take a little drop shot hook like a 1/0, and you guys can see that right there. Let me see. See it? It is just a little thing. And they have little keepers, but I'm going to let Kyle get into that part of it. And then they also make these flick shake hooks right here. And these are just a little weighted now. I have done really good around floating docks and things like this, but once again, it is not like casting this on no weight and casting this. This is a little bit faster presentation, but I have fished in the boat with Kyle, and what amazes me on how fast he fishes the wacky rig. It is unbelievable, and it catches a ton of fish. You can use a 1/0 hook, which are Nico hooks, which I know Kyle does, but I'm going to turn it over to Kyle, and I'm actually going to start taking notes on this one. So, Kyle, it's all yours, man. What is going on with these hooks? What is up with the hooks, and why you choose your hooks?
Yeah, and like I said, I learned a lot of this from Dudley a long time ago, and I've done some modifications, what I like to do, but probably the biggest thing that I felt I was doing wrong prior to learning him was I was throwing too small of a hook. I throw 90% of the time, this is the hook that I prefer, is I'm throwing a 2/0 Nico hook, and it's got like a nice little, like a little rubber, it's like a sealed eye basically, but it's kind of, I would say, a medium wire hook. It's just a big, 2/0 Nico hook. And basically I'm just taking that hook, and I'm just like you were, I'm putting it right through the middle of the worm. I like a lot of different baits, but I think the key to a wacky worm is like the salt content in it. You want a bait that has some weight to it. So it naturally is going to have some, sink rate to it. Some of the Elastex type stuff is hard to get a good sink rate on and a good shimmy. But basically, with this is a 5-inch Yamamoto, and I'm just basically skin hooking this thing. So it, I'm throwing a considerably bigger hook than I think a lot of people are. But when you get around grass and you get around, you'll get hooked. Probably the worst thing is the wood that gets hooked in. But if you get around grass, you can snap your rod and you can actually work it up over it, let it fall down in the holes. But I feel like my hookup ratio is really, really good with the wacky worm. And basically, I set it up on a couple different things. If I'm, what I want to say, like fishing edges or holes of grass where I don't have a lot of cover, if I'm around boat docks where I can get them out pretty easy, I'm pretty much 100% going from I throw like a 15-pound Gamma braid. I'll put this on my main spool, and then I'm putting in a 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. And I'll tie the Alberto knot, and I'll have a 6 to 8 foot leader on that. So I'll go from 15-pound braid to 10-pound fluorocarbon leader, and then just basically, tie in this 2/0 hook to that. And, you'll go through, you'll get hung, you'll just break it off, retie another leader and move on. But I like to throw it on like a 7.2 medium heavy spinning rod. This here is a favorite jackhammer, spinning rod. It has a pretty stiff backbone actually through this rod. And I like to, when I hook up, I'm trying to, get them away, because if it's a mat or you're fishing next to something, that fish is coming out to get it, like they're going to want to go back in there. So you need enough power to get the fish where you want him. And then you want to get your drag set right and allow that fish to, not overdo it. But that setup, I have broken very few fish off, and I've been hung in some pretty thick grass that those fish have gotten buried up in. And as long as you take your time and keep that, like I said, that hook pinned in their mouth, the hookup ratio is really good.
Mm-hmm.
So another like modification that I'll do, you mentioned it, like the flick shake.
Mm-hmm.
When I get into some spotted bass lakes, probably is what comes to mind, where you got a lot of real deep floating boat docks. I'll throw this, and I'll take actually, you can kind of see it's wrapped in lead.
Mm-hmm.
I'll take lead wire, and I will actually take the same Nico hook, and I'll wrap, I'll modify how much lead I want to put. If I'm adding maybe an 1/8 ounce or a 32nd of an ounce, like it just depends how much I want it to fall, or maybe the fish are suspended way down. I'll throw it out there so it, gets down to them a little quicker. You're not wasting a lot of time. But I use that hook pretty much, that 2/0 Nico hook, in every situation with the wacky worm. I'll even bump up and throw it on. So this one here is a Bass Pro Shop Sticko and a 5.5 inch. And then this is actually the bigger one. This is a 6 3/4, I think, or 6 inch. This one has a lot more bulkiness to it. It's a bigger bait, but I'll throw both of these baits on the same setup. And it seems like after the spawn all the way through the rest of the year, like I go to the bigger wacky worm, actually. It just seems to generate a bigger bite. I don't know if it's just more or less, representing like a bigger bluegill, but it seems to just get bit better than like the 5-inch wacky worms.
Okay, now what kind of reel are you? Is that a 2,000 reel, a 3,000 reel? It is.
Yeah. So this, and like I said, I just kind of run like middle of the road, but I found like these Lew's, just these Mach 2 spinning reels.
I have one. They're nice.
Good.
Yep.
They're nice reel. I'm hard on my equipment, so if I burn up reels, I'll go get another one. But it's a 200 series. So you're putting that 15-pound braid on there, 10-pound fluorocarbon. You can put tons of line on those. That's why I go to like a 200 or 2,000 series reel versus a 3. Is the line diameter is so small in that braid that you can cast it a mile on those smaller reel sizes and still have plenty of space on there to put line. So, if I was throwing heavier braid or something like that, or just straight fluorocarbon, I'd probably go to a bigger size reel. But I just prefer to go with those, and I've never had an issue so far.
With the 5 and 6 inch baits, now, do you always wacky rig them, or do you Texas rig as well?
For the most part, like if we're talking straight spinning rod setups, like the same way, I will once in a while, I'll actually go to a Gamakatsu 4/0 skip gap hook.
Yep.
And I don't have any on me, but it's got a couple extra bends up on the head. It keeps the bait on the shank of the hook better from slipping off. But I'll Texas rig that, and I can actually then skip that. Like I like to do that when I'm skipping way back underneath like tree limbs and shady spots and things like that, where I can throw the wacky worm the way that I like to throw it back there, but the hook's exposed. So I like to take and Texas rig that on my spinning rod and really just zip it back all the way to the bank, and then I can drag it out. Like biggest thing comes to mind is like the Ohio River. There's a lot of like real, just little space between the water level and the tree limb hanging over. And if you can skip that, underneath all those limbs all the way to the bank, and then just drag that out, that's one application where I actually will Texas rig it on the spinning rod. Just because with a bait caster, it's super hard to pull the same situation off to get it way back there like that. The spinning rod just makes it so much easier. If I'm around a lot of grass once in a while, I'll also do that too. If the grass is topped up higher than I prefer, but if I have enough space, I'll just bring the traditional wacky worm with the exposed hook through the grass. I'll keep it. You just got to feather it just above the grass. Keep it out of there. If you get hooked in it, just rip it out a little bit. But then you're looking for that hole. And if you can find, if just the size of a milk jug or something, if there's a hole there, get your wacky worm to it and just let it kind of shimmy down in that hole. And it's amazing how many times you'll get bit in those holes and you think, well, I would have saw the fish if it was sitting there, but I think they just get to where they're ambushing the openness in the hole and they're sitting, camouflaged in the grass. And, like I said, I stay 99% of the time with just the 10-pound fluorocarbon leader. and the exposed hook. That's
And
just
it's not always like what you said with that wacky rig. When you cast it, you are not always just letting it sink neither, are you? You are actually casting it out, working that bait. Sometimes I watch you cast it and you'll let it sink beside a log and then you'll work it out real fast and you like keep eye contact. Is there anything specific, like on a retrieve that you always do to start off with?
Yeah, the biggest thing with the retrieve is when you get in tune with that bait and the fall rate of your setup with your hook and how fast the wacky worm falls. Say I'm fishing in 3 foot of water and I know that grass is topped out at, say, halfway up. So I know I have about 1.5 feet of clearance from the water, the top of the water to the top of the grass. I can't visually see that. I'm just picturing like with what's around me, like when I make that long cast. So I'm kind of counting down to get to the top of that grass, or I'll kind of feel it, and then I'm kind of ripping it out of the top of the grass. I want it to get down as close as I can, just into the tips of that grass, so I'm not getting hung or barely getting hung, that I can snatch it out. If you're just kind of working it all the way across the surface, you're going to catch some fish that are going to come from down in the bottom of that grass all the way through the top of the grass to come get it. But I'm wanting to like entice the fish that are, what I'm saying, kind of hunkered down in the grass, and I'm trying to almost get a reaction bite from those fish that I can't quite get it down to their face, but I'm hovering it right above them, And same thing goes with like around laydowns. You've got to be really, really good and in tune with that fall rate, because if there's a laydown, you're trying to bring that wacky worm through, and you get to the big part of the stem of the log, you want to drop that and let it fall down as far as you possibly think you can before it's going to get hung, and then you want to shimmy it back up to the next spot. So that's why like it kind of looks like craziness when I'm working a wacky worm sometimes, but like it's all about getting it as close to trouble from getting hung up and getting it out, because I feel like that's where a lot of those fish are, they're hunkered down in that stuff. But there's times when I honestly will throw it out there and I literally won't move it. I will literally watch for my line to twitch. So it just kind of all depends, like if they're on beds or around beds, you definitely need to get that bait, you're blind casting to these areas, but you need to get the bait down to the bed, or else, it's not going to be close enough to, get them to react to it and come up and get it.
Wow. That's a lot of information. And before I forget, I got one more question. The little black keepers, do you use them or don't use them? Only practice, no practice. What do you do? What's your thing on them?
What do you mean by the black keepers? Like shaking off, or like?
No, like the little O-rings. Do you use the O-rings, the wacky worm O-rings?
I used them originally, and I've used them at times, but I have got to the point now that I do not use them, because the main reason is, unless you use a double O-ring or a specific way, when you put the hook through the O-ring's sitting this way, and you have to put your hook through it this way. So your hook is not actually pointing the way that you want it up, it's pointing sideways when you come through the O-ring. So when I throw that wacky worm, I put it through the worm, straight through the worm, so that when I'm working that bait, that the hook itself, is pointed, what I want to say, this way, not this way. So I can actually bring that bait through grass. The hook is actually working as almost a keel, as it goes through the water. And I think that's how I can bring it. You bring it through a lot of times, random grass stalks and stuff, and it comes through pretty well. It's because that hook is pointing the right direction.
No, I've seen you do it. I mean, we fished last year at East Harbor, and we fished.
Right.
And dude, I was throwing a speed worm, you were throwing a wacky worm, and I'm like, what a pain in the butt. And he was catching them. So I know it works, but it's something that you got to commit to. That's the other thing. So when you start wacky worm fishing, I mean, if you start at the farm pond or a stone quarry, you can't go wrong with the wacky rig and a brown pumpkin, can you? Like that, right. You can take farm pond or any place. It doesn't matter. But rod, reel, line, bait, we covered that, covered the hook. Okay, little refresher. So let's go back. Let's stay where we're at with the Senkos. Rod is a how long?
I like about all the rods that I throw are 7'2", but I would say something between 7 foot and 7'2". Medium heavy is my preference. Yep. I mean, you really can't go wrong. It's just how you want a rod that you feel comfortable skipping. You know, a lot of these fish are caught putting this bait in places that other baits just aren't getting. You know, it's in the shade, it's underneath the dock, it's in a grass little hole that you somehow can throw that perfectly in that little hole that, and it's just a lot of people probably are flipping those holes, but it's a different presentation. So it's a medium. That's my preference. 7.2 medium heavy all day long. A rod that has a little backbone, but it's also got a soft tip that is able to work the bait, and you can feel it, and you can skip it really well, because it's a bait that I skip all the time. Even when I'm in open water with nothing around, a lot of times I honestly am skipping that bait because I don't want to throw a big long launch cast and let that worm just smack the water. You know, I'm skipping it. A lot of times I think the fish think it's like a shad skittering around or something, because it's going skip, skip, skip. It's making these little things, and then when it stops, like the fish honestly will almost wake it. So I don't know, like a lot of times you see like dragonflies and you see weird, you know, like bass will actually somehow see that stuff and eat them when they swoop down to the water. So it's that shadow. It's just that quiet presentation. I don't know. It's just a bait that, like you said, you really can't go wrong with it. One thing I do want to say is, if you got kids fishing in your boat, or you have trying to get kids into the sport, the easiest way is to put it on, you know, a Zebco 33 type reel or a spinning rod, and let that kid cast it out there, because it's one of those baits that you really can't work it wrong. And
they eat it.
It gets, like my girls, that's how, you know, they can go out in the boat with me and actually catch fish. It's just a random cast out in the middle of nowhere, but you kind of move it a little bit and it gets bit, you know? So
yeah. No, and I agree with that 100%. And something else, as we keep talking about it, I keep finding all these little things where it's useful for, and where I actually use it, and I have it tied up all year, is actually a throwback bait. So when I'm throwing a spook or throwing a frog or something in that nature, and I get one to roll on it, sometimes those fish are looking around like they killed it, and you lob that thing out there, and that thing gets knobbed every time. So
100%.
as a throwback bait is very, very important. So learn the wacky rig is very, very important. Very, very important. No matter where you live in the country. Colors, very simple colors. And we didn't talk too much about colors punching, but it's pretty much the same colors. You know, you want to keep it very simple. Black, blues, sapphires, pumpkins, like the original, some watermelons. You like what? Watermelon, blue flake, or what colors you like?
I mean, I keep it really simple. On the punching baits, I like a bluegill imitator, so I'm going like green pumpkin with flake, or something that's like a watermelon red. You know, if you get down in that tannic water, like a watermelon red. Even up here in Ohio where it's not tannic, like something that resembles a bluegill, a natural bait. That's my go-to. If it's real dingy or dark, I'll go to the black and blue. So that's like honestly my only two colors I'll throw. It's that simple. When I get to the wacky worm, 90% of the time I'm throwing something that's probably a natural bluegill style bait. Like it's a green pumpkin with flake. It's going to be a Houdini. It's going to be a watermelon red. I will go venture off and like throw black and blue, black and red flake at times. And once in a while, like if I'm fishing certain times of year, I'll go to the extremes. Like I'll go to a bright green chartreuse. I'll go to a bright bubblegum pink trick, like a bubblegum colored worm. That is really hard for bedding fish in clear water to resist, is when you put something super bright in their danger zone and they just can't resist it. It's sitting above their face, and it just gains a lot more attention, and it's bold than a natural color.
And that's a fun bite too. Yeah, no, it's a fun bite. Yeah.
Yeah, because you actually watch the bait. You watch how you work your bait, and you bring it right up to where you think they are, and they'll just come over and shark it, and you can watch them eat it. The hard part is just letting them have it long enough to set the hook.
Yeah, you know, bubblegum trick or bubblegum stick baits be what? Spawn all the way through post spawn, like that spawn period. Those three little phases is awesome. So, dude, is there anything else? Anything else you forget about all your secrets? You probably forgot more than we all know. So, anything else?
No, I don't know. That's just how I like to do it. There's people probably have other ways that are just as successful, more successful, but each person has to know how they fish and you know what their strengths are, and that's just I've got to where I'm really happy with the hookup ratios I have, with what I'm doing, the program that I'm putting together, with the setups I have, and until it starts going wrong, like I'm gonna stick with what I'm doing with how I have everything set up.
Don't change anything, buddy.
Right.
You're a heck of a hammer. I love learning from you. You've taught me a ton. And before we go, people you want to thank, man.
I got a ton of people to thank. I mean, first my family. I mean, doing what we do, man. There's a lot of sacrifices that other people have to make in order to just get even the chance to do what we get to do. And we all have sponsors. I mean, I have a ton of sponsors. You can see a bunch of them back here. A lot of them been with me, but you know, Freedom, you know, Outdoors has really done me right with, you know, always making sure I got a boat in my possession to go to these tournaments. I mean, things happen with boats, you know, in any time that I've needed something done, went above and beyond to get me back in a boat and get me back at an event. And, you know, so many of these tournaments are accumulated points throughout the year. So if you have one event where you're broke down or something, like that's a huge disadvantage. So getting somebody that, you know, you trust and they know what they're doing, like on your side, like that's been a big help. But, you know, IOSO products, a lot of people have seen, they've been with me for a lot of years. I got their live well cleaners. If you haven't ever tried that, when you guys clean out your live wells, it's the easiest, most fish friendly way I've ever found to clean my live wells. That's an awesome product that they offer. And then we got Blue Spruce Whitetails. We got Lee's Market Jerky, Metalink. I mean, there's just so many of them that I really appreciate. Straight Up Mounts this year is going to be with me, so I'm going to be running their mounts. I'm excited to work with them. They make a good product, so you're going to be seeing a lot of that this year. And yeah, I mean, just Mercury, all of them, Power Pole. There's so many. I mean, you honestly rely on everybody for a specific purpose of what product they offer or how they help you. Just like Torque Lift's another sponsor this year. They're going to help me with my truck and my truck camper, you know, so I'm relying on their products to get me to and from each tournament, you know, so.
No, it's unique when you put it that way. There is a lot of people and a lot of sacrifices made, but it's like a bunch of things going on behind the scenes that you don't see to actually make a season successful. Even if it wasn't the best on winnings or this, and this, if you can make it to the first tournament, to the end of the tournament with all the variables we deal with, that's a successful season. You know what I'm saying? So, like all the baits we talked about today, all the baits, dude, Fisherman Central, I have to thank those guys. Those guys are a huge part. You've ordered from them. Those guys have what you need if you're an angler. I don't care what you fish for. Fisherman Central has it, and you can order at Fisherman Central online, but everything that we talked about, besides the Bass Pro Shop stickos, can't get those there. We can't get those there. And then Seven Rivers Marine helps me through the year. Same deal with Kyle. I mean, they get me a boat, make sure at every tournament, I got the best performing boat, all my equipment's up to where it needs to be. Jonathan, those guys are awesome. So if you're in the market for a pontoon or maybe just a riverboat or maybe a new Falcon Express, check out Seven Rivers Marine. Kyle, I appreciate everything, brother. And I'm ready to go fishing. So,
well, we're going to be competing against each other this year. This is something we haven't done for a while.
I know. You were taking my money last time I stopped. I quit doing that stuff.
Let's keep it that way.
I don't know. Been working. I don't know. We'll see, buddy. Can't wait, though. Be fun.
Right. Well, thanks again.
Thanks, brother. I appreciate it. Later.
We'll see ya. Peace out.